Hello and welcome to the second Open Banking Expo Canadian Quarterly Meetup. As with our first meetup earlier in the year, this is a chance for the open banking community of Canada to come together to share ideas and experiences as we work towards a future vision for open banking. Thank you for joining us for a packed agenda, and thank you also to our lead partner EY Canada and our event partner Open Banking Initiative Canada. Since our first meetup, there have been some significant open banking developments in Canada, so we have two panel sessions for you today. The first of these brings together experts and leaders from across the ecosystem to react to the final report from the Government of Canada's Advisory Committee on Open Banking. Back in August, this recommended that the initial open banking roadmap be implemented or operational by January 2023. So our second panel session later in the meetup will be discussing Brazil and the Middle East and what Canada can learn from these regions which have embraced open banking. During the first panel, the speakers will be taking your questions, so don't forget to submit these via the Swap Card platform. Open Banking Expo is also pleased to be bringing you the Canada Confex as a hybrid event on the 23rd to 24th of November at what is a hugely exciting time, of course. As I mentioned earlier, the Advisory Committee released their recommendations for open banking implementation by 2023. And in the recent snap election, both Conservative and Liberal parties made open banking promises in their respective campaigns. Meanwhile, the National Bank of Canada recently invested $103 million in financial data company Flinks. So there'll be plenty of discussion about what all this means for open banking in Canada. And you'll also be able to hear from guest speaker Bill Morneau, the former Minister of Finance of Canada, and Scott Farrell, who led the Australian government's review into open banking in Australia, and subsequently the inquiry last year into the future direction of the consumer data right. To receive a 20% discount for this event, use the code MEETUP20. Right, now on to our first panel session, and I'm going to hand over to moderator Cormac Leddy, who is Senior Manager, Technology Consulting at EY. Over to you, Cormac.
Thank you very much, Ali, and welcome everyone to our second Open Banking Expo Meetup. I'm your moderator, Cormac Leddy, a Senior Manager with EY Canada's Banking and Technology Consulting Group, and a leader in our open banking practice. I'm excited for today's conversation, which will discuss the industry's reaction following the release of the final report from Canada's Advisory Committee on Open Banking. Some highlights of recommendations from the report include required participation from all federally regulated banks while allowing provincially regulated financial institutions, such as credit unions, to join on a voluntary basis, having an operational open banking system by January 2023, having a scope of data based on what is traditionally readily available to consumers through their online banking application, so as to ensure there is no reduction in value creation from what exists today. The report also touched on some areas of concern from the consultation, for example, regarding existing legislation in Canada under the current prudential regulatory framework. One challenge highlighted is on accountability for outsourced activities, which currently resides with banks. Another example from an open banking framework perspective is on establishing an accreditation framework which strikes the right balance between promoting entry to the system for smaller participants while maintaining security and protection for all participants will be crucial. During the course of this meetup, we will discuss what this report means for the industry and, more importantly, for consumers and small and medium enterprises who are identified as part of the initial recommended scope, where we can look to other leading markets in open banking and incorporate learnings and solutions in the development of the Canadian open banking framework. What next steps the industry should take in light of the January 2023 timeframe, touching on standards, elements where we foresee challenges, and considerations for the selection of an open banking lead. And lastly, what next steps the industry believes should be taken to move Canada forward with focus on driving value and innovation for Canadians. Participating in today's discussion, we have an illustrious panel which includes Andrew Moor, President and CEO of Equitable Bank, Steve Baums, Executive Director of FData North America, Michelle Beyo, CEO of Finavator and OBIC board member, Senator Colin, Deacon, independent senator, Sue Britton, CEO of the FinTech Growth Syndicate, and Stéphane Bousquet, open banking leader of National Bank of Canada. And with that, we're going to jump right into the first question, which is, with the release of the Advisory Committee's final recommendations report in August, what steps are needed to drive open banking forward as an industry in Canada? Steve, over to you to kick us off.
Thanks, Cormac, and great to be with you and great to be with so many expert folks on this panel. Looking forward to the conversation, and more importantly, looking forward to when we can do this in the same physical place at some point, hopefully very soon. So Cormac, you asked a very simple question. What are the next steps, right? And there's one very obvious answer if you look at the report and its recommendations, and that's the one that I'll focus on, which is the onboarding of a senior official within the Department of Finance as the open banking lead, who will be responsible for, in consultation with industry, writing the specific rules of the road for how open finance will be deployed in Canada. And I'd offer, Cormac, it's great. We've got this advisory committee report, which functionally can be used as a roadmap for that person. It lays out the equities on every side of most of the issues, the key considerations that should be contemplated for many of the important issues. And it's a fantastic document that captures almost 4 years of conversations that stakeholders from all across the financial services spectrum in Canada have been having. There really is no stone that was not turned over during those conversations. And so my hope would be that with the hiring of the open banking lead, especially now that the elections are over, we can actually start the process of not just designing, but implementing the open finance framework in Canada in time for January 2023 to begin its implementation.
Awesome. Thanks for those points, Steve. Michelle, I'm going to pass this question to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be on this panel and really get into what is next. How do we get there? 2023 is a date that we can drive towards as an industry. And I think what's so important, considering we're so far behind in regards to global perspective of other markets like the UK and Australia and Brazil and Singapore, I think we need to work together as an industry. I think Steve made the most important next step, which is we need a lead from the government to be appointed. And now that the government is reformed, quite similar to what it was, moving that forward is so crucial, because I think the other aspect of that is, how do we get data privacy rights in the hands of consumers, as what was recommended within the report as well. So I think it's quite important that we also look to Bill C-11 and how we update PIPEDA to move forward as an entire industry to get this market moving, not just from a market-led approach, but from a move as quickly as possible, looking to how Australia moved so quickly in 18 months with an open data regulatory framework and get the whole ecosystem together to drive forward. And I'm excited to what that means for the Canadian ecosystem for all parties, including banks and fintechs, and especially consumers and SMEs.
Thanks for that, Michelle. Stéphane, could we get a perspective from you on this, please?
Yeah, hey Cormac. So basically as Steve and Michelle said, step one is obvious. We need this open banking lead nominated ASAP. Early 2023 is tomorrow. So we're looking at a time frame right now where it would be expected to stand up an open banking system in roughly a year. So once this open banking lead is in place, we need to come together as an ecosystem and get to work ASAP on all fronts, be it governance, setting the rules, the accreditation process in place, standards, the whole shebang. So we're just at the starting blocks, getting ready to go.
Okay, Senator Deacon.
I don't have an awful lot to add to what's already been said. Great comments so far, Cormac. But I'm going to be looking for the open banking issue being very high on the Minister of Finance's mandate letter. Point 1 or 2 or 3, right at the very top, with a statement about the target date in there as well, so that it's a very clear signal to everyone that this is happening, and let's not have anybody dragging their feet. Number two, I'd like to see in the Minister of Industry or Innovations mandate letter to have a reintroduction of Bill C11 and specifically the implementation of data portability rights for Canadians and updating our privacy regime quickly as being very high on the list of priorities on that mandate letter as well.
Okay, thanks you for those points, Senator Deacon. Andrew, your perspective on this?
Yeah, I'm sort of going to follow along where Senator Deacon was coming from. I think it's mostly about the political will, or a lot of it is about the declared political will. So the mandate letters are clearly going to be important to make sure they're high enough. And I think I'd love to hear the Minister of Finance weigh in herself on this this matter. We know that it is going to be the same Minister of Finance as we had prior to the election. So if we could actually hear her speaking about the merits of this and make it clear it's part of her priority set, I think that's really going to take us a long way. I think it's one of the things we've lacked in Canada has been that kind of political will. I mean, wheels have moved behind the scenes. We haven't really heard the government standing up and speaking for it. And I think what was really interesting is it became an issue in this election. I mean, frankly, in elections, I thought was frankly pretty boring. You know, open banking became an issue. And if you heard the Tories pitch on open banking, they were right in there as well as the Liberals. And I just get, the only thing that concerns me a little bit is some other issues going to impact banks around taxes and interchange fees and some other things that were mentioned. So I hope open banking, which to me is much more important to the future structure of the financial services industry, doesn't get somehow bogged down in some broader issues between the banks and the government.
Great, thank you. And Sue, finally with you for this question.
Thanks, Cormac. I thought that you would go through, most of the main points. So I have a couple of new ones that I just want to throw on the table. I think one is we can't let up the pressure politically. And I think even with the Deputy Minister, who I'm not sure how many of you have met with or how many people who are here today have met with, but I think that is something that is probably something to double click on. I also think we have to get moving before the lead is announced. I think if we all wait until the lead is announced, we are going to be waiting and waiting and waiting. Having watched, sort of the FDX Canadian Executive Director appointment process, and that's mostly banks at the table. That was a very difficult thing for them to agree on. And so I have some ideas about that, which maybe I'll get in the next question. And the last one I would just throw out to the industry one is, can we get some proof together as an industry about the Canadian, consumer and Canadian small business and how much they're actually using fintechs? Because that data doesn't exist. And I think the economic argument is the one that's going to tip over the political landscape to make this move. And so if our industry could just get together and put some of that data together, I think we would have a real strong case to make.
Okay, yeah, really great points. Would anyone like to add anything further on this question? No. With that takes us kind of into the next key kind of question we had, which was around the actual rollout plan itself for open banking in Canada. So to date, we know that Canada has not put in place a firm plan to enable the rollout of open banking. While it has been, rollout has occurred in other jurisdictions, and they've introduced regulatory frameworks that allow new entrants to enter the regulated sector safely and securely, enabling growth and innovation and creation of new customer value propositions. The question, which for you, Michelle, first, what will be needed for Canada to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of open banking?
Yeah, thanks, Cormac. I'm just excited for what Canada can become once we push forward. And I think what we need is a regulatory framework. I know that market-led does sound attractive, but we don't have 10,000 banks and 8,000 fintechs like the US. We really have 6 banks and I think 1,200 fintechs, but the fintechs really don't have a fair ground to be able to grow and work alongside the banks. So if you look at markets very similar to Canada, like I mentioned before, like the UK as well as Australia, they have similar climates in the sense of banking. And you can see what it's done to their ecosystem by embedding this regulatory move to mandate open banking. It has pushed the banks to innovate. It has not taken any of the banks off the top 100 list. It has only actually helped them innovate and grow their business models to work with more fintechs. And the fintechs within the UK specifically have been able to drive incredible investments within the UK ecosystem. To an example point of Canada being at 241 million in 2019 in comparison to about 6 billion in the UK, and that's minus the WorldPay acquisition that year. So looking at the investment dollars that can be pushed by moving a market with a true mandate, I think will truly allow Canada to catch up, because we're about 5 years behind. And just the technology and the consumer accessibility to new products and services is truly important. And I think Sue's point is quite crucial. If we had 4 million people using screen scraping back in 2019, and we've had this mass acceleration due to COVID with digitalization and people using more services, I think we could be anywhere between 5 and 6 million Canadians using fintechs today. And I think that stat is quite crucial for us to find out, because I do think it will help on a tipping point.
Thanks for that, Michelle. Steve, would you like to share some opinions on this question?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think the point that Sue made and that Michelle just underscored is the critical one, right? So there's been this kind of implicit view that we can't move forward with open banking because it opens up Pandora's box, when in truth, the box has been open for years and years and years and years. And to take the metaphor to its most tenuous position, the hole in the box is only getting bigger the longer we wait. And so I'll just share a little bit of a sense of frustration, maybe more than a little bit of a sense of frustration. Michelle said Canada is 5 years behind. I actually think Canada is more than 5 years behind, and I think the pace of Canada falling behind is only going to quicken the longer we wait. There's fundamentally nothing new about this conversation 4 years hence in Canada than there was when we started it back in 2017, 2018. The equities on every side are self-evident. The only difference is the longer we wait, the harder it gets to actually transition the ecosystem, because we have more and more consumers, more and more small businesses, more and more fintechs, more and more financial institutions that already have a stake or a position in the status quo. So from my way of thinking, this is one of those very straightforward issues where the longer you wait to move forward, the harder it gets to do so. And for the life of me, I cannot contemplate what benefit there is to not meaningfully moving this file forward in line with what the advisory committee report suggestions were. So Cormac, sorry, I know that wasn't quite the question you asked, but there we go.
Thanks for that, Steve. Sue, I'm going to go back to you on the same question. So the question again around what will Canada need to do in terms of catching up with the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to just pick up on something Michelle said and Steve said, and I think the opportunity. Actually, I'll start with this, Steve, your comment. I don't know if you'd agree with this or not, because I'm completely aligned with you, but I actually think that the number is way more than 4 million or 6 million when you start to look at how many of us are using Google and Amazon and Apple and everything else, right? Like I'm so reliant on all those apps on my phone, and even more so now. And so, I suspect we might just find that the banks actually are losing more ground than they realize, to at least opportunity anyway, to these, not just new entrants, not just fintechs, but to tech giants. And so I think that there is now more than ever, we just have to have a heavier hand from the regulators, from the government, to put that time. Like everybody's saying, oh, January 2023, don't worry, it's not going to be that, because it can't be, because of all sorts of bazillion reasons. But I think that's something that we have to actually, try and and put pressure on to make happen, because everyone responded really quickly when we all went to work from home on March, whatever the date was, 19th or whatever it was, and money flowed into people's accounts. So things take up the space that you give them, and so let's not give it space. The one thing I think we absolutely have to figure out is accreditation. I really think that accreditation has to be fast, and I worry about that. I'm not an expert on the other regions and how they're handling it, but it looks to me like it is, so we get the banks to all do what they need to do by a certain date, and then now you need to give third parties access, and in order to do that, they have to be accredited. Well, that can take forever, right? And I think that that's another issue, that if we could find a way to get an industry supported solution in quickly, then at least we can have the marketplace, or whatever you want to call it, there and ready for when we launch.
Thanks, Sue. So on the previous conversation on our previous meetup, we did talk a lot about the different investments which are being made, by many of the players in the ecosystem. I think Verify.me was mentioned. Neobanks partnering with credit unions around savings accounts and no fees, and some of the innovation that we do see happening in Canada from the banks. We also, I guess, to your point around accreditation as well, it would be good to get the perspective of maybe what Stéphane as well, just on this question, and from a bank's perspective, around the plan to move open banking forward, considering market-led approach versus a regulatory-led approach. Stéphane, I'll pass it over to you to talk a little bit about this.
So a couple of items here that I jotted down. So first, to Sue's point, what we need to do here, in the light of the need to move with pace, we need to be smart about the way we structure this plan, this roadmap to stand up a fully functioning system within the next, say, 18 months. All right. Accreditation is definitely a big chunk. This one's going to be fairly complex to devise. So I totally agree. This is one of the items that need to be on the agenda sooner than later, and that needs to be fully defined by the ecosystem participants. Also in agreement with Steve on the notion of, are we 3 years, 5 years, 10 years behind, and whatnot. We can argue on the exact number, but the fact remains that yes, the open banking ecosystem exists in Canada. It exists, it's in production. The issue is that it exists in a form that is lawless, that has no rules, that has no frame, and we need to address that, right? So, and what we need to do, and our position at NBC is, as ecosystem participants, as ecosystem players, we need to come together and set forward an agenda, a roadmap that is practical. That'll allow us to stand up this system as quickly as possible. So we're going to have to iterate on certain dimensions, and I take it we'll address the notion of scope further on this conversation. But I think we need a long, hard look at the scope that's currently on the table and the time frames that are set in front of us, and we need to set something up that's practical, that'll allow us to stand up an MVP and then address the meatier or more complex portions of scope in further iterations. And so that's our position. And maybe to one last item, obviously, I cannot speak for my peers of the other financial institutions in Canada, but on our end, at least, we are very, very well aware of the pressures that are being put on us through tech, be it through fintechs or big tech or so on and so forth. And that is another element that's adding a sense of urgency on our end, at least, as to, we need to address this with as much velocity, as much pace as possible. So, those are pretty much my comments on this question.
Okay, thanks very much, Stéphane. I think we've touched a little bit kind of on some of the standards that should apply in terms of keeping the system safe. But perhaps just, I'll just quickly kind of go back to Steve on this question around the importance of achieving the 2023 deadline, and anything you would add on in terms of, standards that need to be in place for a safe and secure system.
Yeah, sure, Cormac. So look, first, I think it's essential that we put a stake in the ground and we say, here is the time that we're hoping to implement. Whether we hit that or not, I can't say as we sit here. I'm very much in agreement with, I think Stéphane said this earlier. When the report was first drafted in April, January of 2023 was 18 plus months away. As we sit here, it'll be October at the end of this week. We're functionally getting closer and closer to a year. The longer we wait to get started, the more challenging it gets. So that's the first thing. Second thing I would say is standards have to be in service of policy, not the other way around. And so I do agree in a general sense with Sue. We need to get things moving even before the open banking lead is in the position. On the other hand, from the perspective of FData, we've seen standards being proposed in Canada and other markets that have implicitly made policy decisions. What data could or cannot be made available to the consumer? What does consent look like? What would accreditation look like for third parties? What does digital identity management look like? You mentioned verify.me, for example, earlier. So from our way of thinking, it's a bit of a catch-22, right? How do you move forward before you know what the standards are without implicitly deciding what the policy should be? And from our perspective, getting that framework of how the policy environment should look is the key prerequisite before you start actually developing the standards, be they technology or accreditation or anything else in the system.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. So moving on to kind of discuss other challenges we foresee with moving open banking forward. The report calls out common rules on elements such as liability, privacy, and security. Are there others that are not called out, and how should the industry address these? I think we've touched on some of these again. Stéphane, is there anything you would like to add here from your perspective?
Yeah, so going back to the point I raised earlier, I think the biggest challenge that we're currently faced in the light of the report is the duality of scope versus deadline. And right now, from my viewpoint, there's the two don't fit right now. We have basically a year to stand up a system with a scope that, in our view, is too broad. When you look in certain elements like small business, for example, small business is an interesting beast from a banking perspective. And once again, I'll speak for solely a national bank, but from a technology perspective, we're looking at two distinct technology stacks. So this adds a lot of challenge to, exposing data from that realm. There's also the notion when it comes to small, medium business, the notion of multi-owner businesses. So single owner, not too much of an issue. It's pretty much, the data is structured pretty much the same way as retail banking accounts. But when you have multiple owners and multiple roles within a business, this adds a layer of complexity. And when you map this against an early 2023 deadline, this is where we look at this and go, okay, we have a challenge. We need to break this down into manageable chunks, devise an MVP, bring this one early to market, and then start working on the other data elements in the proposed scope. Investments is another one that requires further discussion, further analysis. It's a very specific beast. So not saying that we at National are against including this in scope, to the contrary, but this is something that, standing this up by early 2023 is fairly complex. So to me, the biggest challenge beyond, elements that will be in the rules like liability, privacy, security is really the notion of scope. We need an agreement on that ASAP before we can, commit to that 2023 deadline, in my view.
Thanks, Stéphane. Andrew, is there anything that you would like to add on this question?
Certainly one of the things I was excited about in the report was the scope was pretty broad, and I think it's pretty clear what we've got to do. Frankly, that data's all got to be available. So I don't see how difficult that really is to do. For small bank like ours can hit these deadlines quite easily. It's mind-boggling to me that the big six, with all of their resources, struggle with this, is the way we hear this language. So I think we just got to put our heads down and get it done. What I would say is we should be taking learnings from other markets. So as well, not necessarily borrowing standards, but in the UK particularly, I think the CX is pretty bad right off the hop. There's a need to re-permission the open banking permissions every 3 months, which is causing some lack of uptake. So, just going back a few questions, possibly probably won't catch up, but certainly if we use some of those learnings, we can actually deliver a better open banking experience quicker, which I think gives us a lot of opportunity to learn from others, things that haven't gone quite right in the first instance.
Thanks, Andrew. So moving on to our next question for the panel, what are some thoughts on the things that should be considered with the selection of the open banking lead, and what form of accreditation should the open banking lead consider for new participants? Senator Deacon, would you like to go first?
I just don't want us to restrict ourselves to just looking in Canada for the lead. We've got to get somebody who can really come in with a lot of credibility in terms of understanding the banking system and what is and is not a problem, because we've seen a lot. I think it's fair to say that the big banks have been reluctant brides when it comes to this project, and we've got to be very smart about keeping feet to the fire. There's no shortage of resources. We've seen that in other markets, open banking has actually, the banks have flourished when they've moved from this, wider and deeper moats approach to regulation, to building ecosystems around themselves that deliver increasing value to consumers and small business. So for me, the biggest thing is let's find a lead as quickly as possible, but government has got to state really clearly, regardless, let's get going. There are things we can be doing right now, and one of the things I do want us to have on the agenda to chat about briefly is the ability to start prototyping the standards right away through commercial agreements. Let's just get moving with this and do it using techniques that have been long proven in the startup sector. Where you prototype and iterate, get things going and get your learnings going. The last bit I'd just say in terms of the accreditation, there is a lot of good guidance provided by the advisory committee. What I like especially is we're looking at centralized accreditation standards, but that they will be administered by independent bodies. And that, to me, that division of responsibility is really important. But there's some tremendous guidance there. And I like the fact that they are looking at fit to size, fit to risk, because you can kill the opportunity for a fintech to be involved if you put the burden too heavily at the outset. Let's manage the process very carefully relative to the size and of the risk for each of the different organizations involved. It's crucial, because we want to make sure we're bringing a lot of innovation into the sector. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Sue, your perspectives on this question.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that I'm actually going to disagree with a senator, because I'm going to get in trouble
Feel
for
free,
that from
Sue.
my mother, especially. Oh my God. But I actually really do think that we need this lead to come from Canada, because Canada, this person needs to know, where all of the, little loopholes and openings and workarounds and everything are, because I think that's, going to be an important, it's not so much, about the knowledge of the big banks and the Canadian market, but it's more about how our systems have been built and what truly is, to, Andrew's point. And I know you're, fully digital and you've got a very modern system, but, I think that, look, I think the bigger institutions and incumbents, they're all getting ready anyway. And so I think, familiarity is probably a good thing for us. Doesn't mean we can't bring in global experts for advice and help along the way, although I'm not sure who's going to pay for them. But the other thing on accreditation, I think the devil is really in the details here, because with right access, I'm just, like if we were talking liability frameworks for right access, then yeah, we've got some, you know, heavy stuff to talk about. For read access, I think that we need to be really specific about, you know, what it is that a fintech who has been doing, you know, whatever they've been doing for years and years and years needs to then change in order to continue to be considered credible. And so but I think that, you know, things like liability and other things, we should start drafting them now. And I take your point, Steve. I'm not as you know, astute from a you know, sort of a policy perspective as you are, but you know, someone said to me recently, like, if you know, if you were the lead, would you want to come in and have everything a blank sheet of paper? Like, let's start helping the lead by drafting some of these things and actually using use cases. And then just one more tiny little point, Stéphane. Stéphane, what if you started with small businesses just with lending? Like, Shopify took 10% of the Canadian small business lending market. And I love Shopify. This is nothing against them. But there's also, you know, many other small business lenders out there that are more than capable of also servicing that same market. So they took 10% of the market. BDC study, you can go on their website and check it out. And fintechs took another 10%. So, you know, we do need to do something for small businesses. So maybe it's just a use case and it's not a whole, you know, kit and caboodle.
And sorry, just stepping in here, and I totally agree with you, Sue. So basically, you know, what I'm advancing is that, you know, the scope, when we take the scope as it is suggested in the report, taken as a whole, it's a very big chunk. It's a very big chunk to manage, especially given the time frame that's suggested. So so what we need to do is look at this scope and, as you just said, you know, identify where are the areas that can constitute an interesting minimum viable product. You know, where can we get the most bang for our buck right out of the gate? And so, you know, absolutely. And these are the conversations we're looking forward to ASAP. Yeah, definitely.
I think given that you've got, you know, the open banking leader title, I think you should, you know, do small business ecosystems or marketplaces in advance of, you know, the regulation. You don't even need it, really, truly. I mean, that's the one space. Anyway, sorry, Cormac, I'll be quiet now.
Thanks, Sue. I think it's kind of a nice segue into our next question, which is around commercial contracts, kind of where we're going with this conversation. So in your views, what do you see as the largest impediments to commercial contracts between fintechs and banks today? And is open banking one of the ways to address that? Stéphane, I'm going to pass this one back to you to go first.
Well, you know, to me, there's a bit of a no-brainer aspect to this, where an open banking system is definitely going to expedite a certain number of business relationships and use cases, whereas today it's either everything is driven by bilateral agreements or by screen scraping, so no agreement at all. So, you know, to me, this appears as a no-brainer. Yes, you know, an open banking system is definitely going to, you know, facilitate that part of the equation.
That's fun. Steve, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, so look, I would say the absence of any open banking framework today means that the only way for a holder of data to make the data available through an API is through a bilateral data access agreement, right? It's a necessary tool. Having said that, it's an incredibly inefficient and unlevel means of deploying open banking. And to the extent that there is any advantage in Canada being so far behind, this is one of them, because we can see this playing out just south of the border in the US. And American consumers and American small businesses have very different opportunities and very different protections based on who they bank with when they use a third party, because of a bilateral data access agreement between the aggregator that powers that service and the bank that they use, to which they are not a party at all. And as shocking as this might be to hear, believe it or not, bank lawyers are not particularly keen at just taking a template contract and just putting it in front and executing it, right? They all want it to be bespoke and individualized and unique to their institution. So you end up with a patchwork of different agreements that functionally govern a system in unequal ways that lead to bad consumer impact. So for my way of thinking, there's two ways of thinking about fintech contracts, right? One is data access agreements, where it's just how do you get the data when the customer permissions access to it. In an ideal open banking environment, you don't need those anymore, right? There's no need for them because liability, governance, data connectivity, that's all part of the policy framework. As it relates to bilateral relationships or partnerships between fintechs and banks, that's a wholly separate question. And I think open banking actually facilitates quite a bit more of that type of partnership.
Thanks, Steve. And Senator Deacon, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that it's going to be political leadership is going to be really critical here. And what we've got is a minister who's stated whose government stated that they're going to implement open banking by 2023. We've got a leader of the opposition if anybody heard his video statement on open banking, it was extremely clear. So we've got an articulate voice in opposition that is very much in favor of clear action. So we need to send that message out very quickly, very early, because no one is at this point compelling action. And we've got a plan, but we've got to compel action. There's so much that can be done in parallel versus in series. And I'm very concerned that if that very strong leadership, so I'm just circling back to one of the first points that was made, if that very clear political leadership and commitment is not stated up front, there is nobody going to be compelling the banks to have a standardized commercial agreement that reflects the open banking panel's recommendations. That allows us, I think, to manage risk during this very fast-tracked process by seeing what is working, what isn't working, and seeing how simple modifications might be needed. So I'll leave it there, but that strong political leadership right out of the gate, when the new minister is appointed, we assume being the same as what we had, and we get that consistent response from the government that this is something that we're heading towards and that they're willing to be judged on achieving that deadline.
Thanks for all of your answers. So just moving on to the question on read and write access. Sue, I know you mentioned write access kind of in your answer to the previous question as well. So in the final recommendations report, read access was highlighted in the initial phase of the implementation roadmap, and write access was mentioned, but not mentioned in terms of the implementation. So what key considerations should the open banking lead consider with regards to write access in Canada, and where the rest of the world is in terms of write access in open banking? Sue, would you like to take this question first?
I will give it a shot. I mean, right access and the movement of money is, I think, probably one of the more important things about open banking. And so the fact that it's not on the table is, it's too bad, but it also is, I guess you got to start somewhere. But I think, when I think about the fintech apps that I use, and obviously I know I'm not the customer because I use a lot of them. The ones that I really get use of are the ones that are moving money for me. And those ones that are moving money are doing it without right access in place today. And so they're using workarounds. And I think that that's another one of the ways that, Canada works to accomplish some of the things that consumers want without having any regulation kind of providing oversight on it. So, but I think we're seeing in Europe that, the shift is well underway on payment initiation and right access. And I think although it sucks because it's about pulling money out of bank accounts and putting it into other accounts, it's like the ship has sailed. So.
Thanks, Sue. Michelle, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I think it would have been great to have it as part of the roadmap, maybe not as the January 23rd kickoff, but as something that would be implemented in end of 2023 or beginning of 2024, because realizing we're so far behind, not putting right access into the banking roadmap is really crucial, because when you think about it, we're already having a challenge to move open banking forward. Now that we finally have this initiative, when are we going to get another roadmap that's going to push this market forward? So I think if we could have at least mentioned it to what Sue was talking about, payments is one of the most crucial parts, or paytechs, in the sense of fintechs moving money. When you talk about Canadians utilizing core banks, which 97% of Canadians are using a core bank, but with 4 to 6 million of them also using a Wealthsimple and EQ Bank, a Wave for their accounting system, they're using fintechs, and they just want a better and more secure way to do so. And to alleviate the fintechs of having to screen scrape, which is something they don't want to do, they very, very much want to have this API access so that they can have a better way to service their customers. And I almost pass it to Andrew, knowing that EQ Bank has grown so much since the pandemic, and so many Canadians moving to them to have interest on their bank accounts. I think we just need to move to give better access, and I think right is really important. But I'd love to hear what Andrew has to add as well.
Well, I agree with you, Michelle. I mean, right is absolutely critical for the fintech applications that are going to really add value to the environment. I think that's absolutely critical. I mean, we've got to be clear. We're behind on open banking. We're behind on payments. I was trying to move money from between two of the DSIBs this last week. Got charged $135 to send a wire. It's crazy. And a fintech solution sitting on top of that would allow us to create a lot of value. I think particularly in small business environment where you're going to request to pay and so on is not yet prevalent in Canada. So, but I do have some empathy for the view that the security has to be that much higher before you can get to right access. So let's get there with a full data set. As we get those insights, it's going to be clear that right access is the next place to go, and hopefully we can move there fairly fast.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to our final question of the day. So this is a question for the entire group. Can you share the most important actionable step that will help move Canada forward towards an inclusive open banking ecosystem by January 2023? And Steve, I'm going to pass it to you again.
I'll keep expressing the frustration. Just do it already. I mean, we've got the roadmap. Sue made the point earlier, if you're the open banking lead, would you want to come in with a blank slate, or would you want to have some kind of guidance for how to move forward? I actually think the guidance is there. It's there in 40 plus pages, right? We saw it come out in August. It doesn't have all the answers, but I don't think that was the advisory committee's role. What it has is, what are the key considerations? What are the equities and the costs on either side? And here are the range of options available to you. Are we going to get it perfect right away? No, of course not. There's no jurisdiction in the world that's figured this out perfectly on its first go around. This will have to be incremental. It will have to be revised. It will have to be amended and improved over time. But the longer we wait, I mean, the theme keeps coming up. The longer we wait, the harder it gets. Sue mentioned on right access. You have money movement apps today in Canada. Looking at right access as if somehow that will create this maelstrom of money movement, it exists today. All we're talking about in right access is making it easier for consumers and SMEs on the one hand and giving them more protection on the other. To me, that's all upside. That's very little downside. And so I guess my one kind of more pithy answer, Cormac, would be, we've got to kind of move past the fear that this is going to create harm and just start the process of designing and implementing it finally.
Thanks, Steve. Stéphane, I'll pass this to you.
Yep. So what was just said, we need to get on with it. We need to start, but we need to set ourselves up for success. So what that means is we need a plan that's iterative and one that is practical, that'll allow us to stand up this system in phases. And also we need to identify in this plan as soon as possible, what are those big pieces that will require time. Because, as practical and as fast that we need to be, that we want to be, we will hit some elements that will require debate, discussion, design, implementation. And so those items, let's identify them ASAP, get to work. But as for the rest of the plan, 2 keywords, let's iterate, and let's be very, very practical about this. And that way we'll meet the early 2023 deadline.
Thanks, Stéphane. Andrew?
I think it's, let's start this thing, and the way we need to start it is to have Minister Freeland stand in her most open public pronouncement and say this is going to happen. One of the challenges with even big banks is making sure that everybody within that big bank understands that this is going to happen. And if hearing that directly from the Minister of Finance, or even the Prime Minister, which would be more fantastic, then it can happen. The capabilities there within the organizations, they need to understand this is absolutely a government priority. It's going to happen, and they need to organize their businesses to win in this new environment. So I think it comes down to that political leadership is absolutely the #1 thing I'm looking for that can really make this thing move.
Thanks, Andrew. Michelle?
Yeah, I think it's like not looking at the fear of change, but looking at the opportunity that change drives and the innovation that this new system that is allowing for an ecosystem to work together. And Canadians are known for working together. So I think once we have, like Andrew said, the government stand behind this mission, we can all gather together and start discussions as early as next week and pick out what the challenges are, that Stéphane had mentioned, and just pick them off one by one and have group discussions where we can actually paper some of the challenges and start the work for the lead and come and bring it to them as an open ecosystem so that we can get there. Because I know Canadians can get there. If Australians can get there, and in the UK they can get there, and Brazil can get there faster in this 12-month period than any other market, I know Canadians can do this. So I'm excited for the future of us all working together.
Thanks, Michelle. Sue?
Yeah, I would just add that I think that the most actionable step is more of the economic argument, and to really sort of quantify it. And hopefully you're okay with this, Cormac, but I was doing some research for the acquisition question, and we've had over $17.1 billion in the first half of this year in VC and private equity investments. Like, that's huge in the first half of this year. And by my math, almost 10 billion of it went to fintechs. And for the most part, most of those fintechs, like a Verifin, which is a big number, were not acquired by a Canadian company. Most of those are fintechs scaling and growing and increasing their scaling their businesses. So, I don't see, and certainly both EQ Bank and National Bank excluded, not because they're here, but there's been lots of partnering and acquisition activity with those two banks. But with the other banks, we haven't seen any material partnership or acquisition this year. I could find a couple of things from Canadian Western Bank, Meridian, RBC partnered with DoorDash. Anyway, I'm not trying to be a shit disturber here, but I do think that the reality is that there's a heck of a lot of money going into these great companies. This is only getting to be a bigger problem. We don't have a choice but to move quickly.
Okay, thanks, Sue. I think that closes us off in terms of the question.
I'll just offer one last comment, Cormac, if I could. And that's just, sure. I'd like to harken back to the 93, 94, when Canada was on the cusp of becoming Argentina with our challenging financial situation. And we had Paul Martin stand in front of the world saying, come hell or high water, I'm going to address this issue. And he was able to rally Canadians around a really big challenge. And it was because of the clarity of the statement. And I just want to reinforce, we need a really clear statement from this government that they are committed to getting this done come hell or high water, because it's the foundation of our economy. It is a foundation of delivering financial stability and security to individuals, especially marginalized Canadians, and to really spurring the development of small business. So I think we just need those really clear statements. Come hell or high water, this is getting done. And guys, go figure it out, because we can. I'm very much with Michelle. We can figure it out.
Awesome. Thanks for that point, Senator Deacon, and thank you everyone for your comments on the final question. Super exciting topic, and definitely a lot to think about. And that moves us into the Q&A, the live Q&A part of the discussion today. So we have a first question from the audience. The question is about how open are banks to partnering with fintechs. We have seen things in the market like the National Bank and Flinks partnership, and we want to, I guess, get some perspectives from Stéphane and Andrew on this one. Stéphane, let's start with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, as for National Bank's perspective, we're obviously very, very strong believers in the bank fintech dynamic. We've been investing in Flinks since their inception in 2017, when the open banking discussion was at its infancy. And since Flinks have made a name for themselves, and they are a major player today in the fintech and the open banking landscape. So, and that is just one of a number of partnerships, strategic partnerships that we currently have in place through our strategic VC arm. So, and this is not a passing phase. This is a dynamic that helps us ramp up our digital capabilities, that helps us accelerate our digital transformation. And so if anything, the ecosystem will be seeing National Bank partner more with fintechs rather than less. So, so there we go.
Thanks, Stéphane.
Yeah, probably keep
Andrew.
it perspective. Equitable Bank's perspective, it's core to our strategy. We were one of the founding investors in Borrowwell. We were an investor in Wealthsimple. We partner with all the companies within Portage, Nesto in particular, for digital mortgage origination. So we've got an open ecosystem, and we know we can't do everything ourselves. So we're looking to partner with fintechs with good ideas, partner with Wise for international money transfer. So our whole system is all about working with the ecosystem, and that's why we're such a keen proponents of open banking, because we believe that Canadians will get better services as a result of these fintechs bringing innovation to the market. And we hope that we can be a useful partner to hold money safely, for example, because we offer CDIC insured deposits. There's other pieces of things that we can do really well, and other things that fintechs can do well. The value chain is a combination of us all working together.
Thanks, Stéphane. Thanks, Andrew. So our next question from the audience. If you were appointed open banking lead tomorrow, what is the first thing that you would do? I'm tempted to pass it to Steve again, but I'm going to go with Michelle first.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would do is hold a press conference to truly state the mandate of what we're doing and why we've taken this role to move Canada forward. State the benefits of open banking. Stop focusing on Canadians need to understand open banking. I think this is Steve's comment. Open banking should be like electricity. It's be available, accessible, versus the infrastructure, which is saying. So I don't think it's about educating on open banking. That's an uphill battle. I don't think they understand electricity or how it gets into their houses, but they want to use it because it helps them in their daily. And I think just expressing to the public that towards open banking to make life easier as Canadians, as business owners, give them an option and help them save and under their finance better in the future. And I think it's as simple as that for us to gather, as I mentioned earlier, and move forward together.
Thanks, Michelle. Same question. Would anyone else like to jump in on this one?
I can't resist, Cormac. So maybe I'll jump in very quickly just to say, I agree, Michelle. That would be one of the first things I would do. And at that press conference, I would lay out precisely what your rights to your data are as a bank customer, right? I would say, this is your data. And this is the rights that you are going to have as a consumer or a small business in the open banking environment. I actually think that you can get a lot of industry productive conversation happening about driving this forward. if we take out of the equation commercial interests around what elements of the data belong to end user versus what elements of your data belong to the financial institution.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the panel today. Just to quickly kind of wrap up, thank you everyone. Thank you all for joining for today's discussion. We've heard some great conversation and insights from our panel and questions from the listeners, perhaps at home or maybe back in the office, now that we're all starting to get back to the office. Thanks to the Open Banking Expo, and looking forward to the next conversation on this exciting topic. Thank you.